I'd like to welcome our next session, Supply Chain Risk Management, moderated by Diane Janicek, WIC's Critical Infrastructure. And joining her is Dr. Mary Eichen from Capital Technology University in Washington, D.C., Renee Nguyen from RP Nguyen Consulting, Cameron Over from Cross Country Consulting, and Christy Grinnell from GDIT. Welcome, ladies.
Hello.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think we're all excited to be here, right, ladies?
Yay!
Very much.
Yay. This is an exciting event, so I always look forward to it every year. So thank you, Elizabeth. To all of us, the common denominator of all these panelists are that we really care about supply chain that affects the integrity of every aspect of our business. So we were all excited to be asked to speak today. So I have the pleasure of being the moderator to four amazing experts in their own right, all with a common denominator of understanding what the weakest link is. So as this topic today is supply chain risk, and as it says, it's one of the leading concerns. It really is, as we're think, what's the chain? It's the leading concerns in public-private partnerships, right? The more that we expand and partner with other organizations, the more sophisticated technology gets. The supply chain is a bigger and bigger factor. So it's a driving force behind forging weak links in our nation's security. So I heard you just had trivia. I'll bet you someone knows the answer to this question. But what percent of cybersecurity breaches occur in the supply chain? Ding, 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 ding. 80%. 80% of cybersecurity breaches occur in the supply chain. That's craziness. That's why we're talking about it today. And guess how many companies don't have full visibility into their supply chain? This is based upon a NIST report. Okay, take some guesses. Companies that don't have visibility into their supply chain? 72. Mary was, I should have let you say it. Okay. So she knew. So that's why we got experts on here. I'm not the expert. These ladies are the experts. So we are going to have them talk about why this is a top concern, unpack that a little bit from insurance to technologies, to hardware, to software, to deploying mitigation strategies. So we have some amazing representatives from lots of different sectors. So I am going to ask each individual to kind of say a little bit about themselves and talk about why they see this as a major risk to their business sector. So we are going to start with Cameron, then Christy, then Renee, then Mary. And I think you'll be amazed because there's some common denominators, but their fields of interest are all very different. So the critical infrastructure sectors have so many common denominators. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Cameron.
Hi, I'm Cameron Over. I'm the partner of Cross Country Consulting Cyber and Privacy Practice. I have roughly 20 years of experience in the field, both on the Department of Defense side as well as on the commercial side, and we serve many industries. And speaking of common denominators, supply chain risk kind of doesn't pick favorites. In fact, it's hitting every industry equally. And there's so many diverse industries along the supply chain, regardless of what industry you're in. And so what I would like to share throughout today's session is just how we all have roles to play, and it really is across so many things, more than just software, so many more things than just hardware, and it does affect all of us regardless of our role in industry.
Thanks. Christy.
Hi, I'm Christy Grinnell with GDIT. Thank you so much for having me. I'm the Global CIO and Chief Supply Chain Officer. Two roles that you
got to unpack that a little bit.
Roles you probably don't think of as coming together very often, but actually, given this topic, secure supply chain, they are beautifully paired together because we have to pair IT, cyber, and supply chain together to ensure that the cyber hygiene across our full tiered supply chain is really there to protect the data that we all have for our company, for our nation.
Thank you, Christy. I think you could write a book with what you know, for sure. So thank you. Okay, Renee, you got to make sure you tell them about your background because it's out of this world.
Yeah, there's that too. Hi there, Renee Nguyen. I am the former Chief Information Officer for all of NASA, where we had global infrastructure and off the globe infrastructure, and in fact, did deliver a number of IT services to the astronauts on International Space Station. NASA now was the only entity who had humans in space all the time. China has now joined the United States with that. So it's a slightly different angle in terms of cybersecurity protection. And building off sort of what Christy said, so the angle that I'll bring to you is a space is part of everyday life for all of us. And so securing our space assets, making sure that they didn't turn into a weapon does begin with the supply chain, not only the parts integrity, because space environment is so harsh, but also the integrity of the parts when it comes to cybersecurity. And by the way, I'm not ordinarily pink. Cybersecurity and Breast Cancer Awareness Month fall on the same month. So let's go around and prevent both.
That's awesome. Thank you, Renee. Like I said, out of this world. Okay, and Dr. Mary Aiken is a dear friend of mine and an amazing expert in her own right. So over to you, Mary.
Thanks, Diane. Unlike Renee, I'm not talking about humans in outer space. I'm going to talk about humans in cyberspace. And I think there are lots of parallels, actually. I think that the learnings from NASA and all those years and in terms of how humans have experienced the environment of outer space are equally applicable in this new environment of cyberspace. In 2016, NATO actually designated cyberspace as a domain, acknowledging that the battles of the future would take place on land, sea, air, and on computer networks. So we've now got this environment of cyberspace. I'm a cyber psychologist. I'm a professor at Capital Tech and chair of the Department of Cyber Psychology. So I specialize in the impact of technology on human behavior. My specialist area is forensic cyber psychology, which is the study of criminal, deviant, and abnormal behavior online. And I am kept really busy.
Unfortunately.
I'm also the academic advisor to Europol and to Interpol. So yeah, not a lot that's good happens in my world.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. So you can tell the listeners, thank you for participating. This is quite an amazing group. So we had a prep session and Cameron was telling me about her job, and it actually was really, really interesting the way that she does pre and post mitigation and mediation. And she was talking about all the different software tools and how she does whack-a-mole. So maybe you could tell them what you mean by that, Cameron.
Sure. So, I mean, there's a number of different ways to start thinking about supply chain risk, but one of the ways that many of our clients typically start is looking at the data that it is we're trying to protect. So understanding a concept we called crown jewels. So where is the data that each organization is looking to protect, and identifying where that exists within the organization, as well as perhaps within trusted third parties. And so there's the concept of trust involved too. So speaking of psychology, I do think that there's an aspect here within supply chain of thinking about the trust that you're placing in vendors and also having the appropriate third-party risk management in place and really understanding where you've put your trust within those vendors, especially areas like code, even things like how, if you're talking about manufacturing, how you're getting, various supplies, from A to B. So you have to kind of think about the use cases within each organization and how supply chain risk can come about. And so when we think about whack-a-mole, the concept there is just that, for every organization, depending on where their data is and how you're assessing and measuring risk with those third parties, working through that to remediate what risks are there. And so it's a constant battle, every day are new threats. And if you look at breaches such as Excellion, when they breached Excellion, they used 4-0 day, right? And so every day the attackers are one step ahead of us, and we need to be thinking through how to try to mitigate those in a well-rounded fashion.
Thank you, Cameron, for sharing that. So it is pretty fascinating that the more you unpack it, there's another level below it and it gets even more complicated. So Christy, over to the person that could write a book, because she's got both sides of the problem that she's responsible for. So when we prepped, we talked about how you raise the overall security chain in the supply chain, especially when your organization, you've got so many complex missions and complex customers, you actually have multiple subcontractors that are smaller and smaller manufacturers, and they may not know how. So maybe you could share a little bit about where you see that's going and kind of something that you see that you could share with us in terms of lessons learned.
Sure, absolutely. The the focus of a big prime contractor, as a company like GDIT is often called, is definitely, as Cameron said, it's the focus on data. What type of data do you have? Where is it? And who's going to try and get access to that, right? And you are then trying to protect that data that you have the privilege of having for your customer. And as you think about that, you then need to think about what are the other ways that our adversaries can get to that data. And unfortunately, they go after our weakest link, right? And we start to see that in the supply chain, where you have these small mom and pop shops that have amazing talent, but they're not thinking about that cyber hygiene in the same way that somebody like a large prime contractor who has all this responsibility does. And you can even take that back in your supply chain to even some of your vendors who are learning very quickly with a lot of the events that have happened over the last several years or several months, where, you know, our adversaries are smart and they're patient and they're injecting themselves into source code of software that nobody ever thought could have been touched. And so it's trying to raise that overall cyber hygiene of the entire supply chain, so we can all think data first and what we're trying to protect, and ensure we're not able to move from one company to another, or from one asset to another along that supply chain. So there's great organizations like NIST and that sort of thing that are creating standards for all of us, working with CISA, who I know is part of this panel, to help us understand and raise and educate that awareness and ensure that we're all raising that simple bar to say, this is the baseline that we all have to adhere to. And if we can do this, we can start to thwart our adversaries.
Great. Well, thank you, Christy, for sharing that. So you can already tell that there's lots of topics and lots of juicy nuggets coming out of this already. So thank you for talking about the data piece. And you had mentioned jumping from one asset to another. I was researching about there was a thermometer, an Internet of Things thermometer for a large aquarium in Las Vegas. You know, they have those really big aquariums. And what do you think happened? Talking about jumping from asset to asset. Well, of course, they got into the thermometer, but then they were able to get in from into that, and then through the Internet of Things, actually be able to access customer data. So, and for a casino, that's probably their crown jewels, right? So, so that was important to them. So this jumping makes a big difference. So talking about jumping and maybe jumping from spaceships, we'll go over to Renee next. And Renee, you were going to tell us a little bit about making sure that they're safe. Things are, space assets are safe. And so talk a little bit about your perspective about parts integrity across any domain that you would like. But I know that that's one area of your expertise.
Yeah, Diane, thanks for the question. And Dr. Aiken, I used to always say to folks, I got humans that want to use my IT and I want humans that want to get into my IT. And then we deployed a robot or two, both on space station as well as NASA. Like, oh, great, now I got more than humans trying to do nefarious things. Because trust me, some of the NASA scientists did do nefarious things with my network. Sure. So let's talk about space. I mentioned too that all of us rely on space every single day, GPS, trying to get from one place to another. Our food supply, right, relies on imaging associated with satellites, soil moisture, figuring all of that stuff out, what to plant. Weather is a huge consumer of satellites, and that which helps both military operations as well as our day-to-day operations here, and logistics. Ships, trains, truck shipments all rely on satellites, both for GPS as well as just trucking goods across the United States and across the globe. So cybersecurity for space is a newer domain, and it's growing as an opportunity for fun, fame, or fortune is from the bad guys. It's a combination of 3, 1, or 2 of those things that I just mentioned. So what we did at NASA is we established a supply chain risk program for cybersecurity. And as I left, I was definitely going to integrate that into the parts integrity process, because they're really not different steps. NASA has to look at to ensure that if we're buying a particular part and it says that it's space ready in terms of being able to handle the harsh environment of space, then we do the integrity check on that one, and we need that. Well, then more and more of those parts are coming in are hardware with software attached, sensors with executables in that. And so we began the process of taking a look at the supply chain risk associated with not only tier 3, but we would dive even further. The tier 7 is the sort of gold standard in terms of your part associated with cybersecurity. You look at who's funding these companies, who owns these companies, as well as where are the coding being done. And for software and hardware, that's a real issue. And you have to look at manufacturing as well. And I'll just tell you a story, right? How does this happen? Why does this matter? Besides the fact that we rely on space, and I'm telling you so, is I had the distinct pleasure of having to have a meeting because the chip that was needed for a particular mission, which was the satellite mission, there were already 16 chips already in use in that satellite, and they wanted more of the same. Well, by this point, we had set up our supply chain cyber risk assessment process, and it got stopped. And it got stopped again. And so finally it landed in front of me. So I pulled together a team, my cybersecurity chief information security officer, as well as some supply chain risk expert and so we talked to the team. Well, the good news about being at NASA is the fact that they are really smart and sometimes maybe too smart for their own good. But in this case, it was a great thing. So we talked about that chip use, and what they were doing here at NASA is we were burning that chip down to its basic need, and then we were building it back up with a coding perspective. So I was willing to take the risk to use a chip that was on the shouldn't use list at NASA, and we went ahead and I accepted the risk so that mission could launch. And then we've got to keep our eye on cybersecurity. Isn't about no, it's about yes, and how can we do it? And understanding the business need is the first way to do that, so that you don't. So part of the reason is so you can safely get to your car in the parking lot whenever we return to the office. I would occasionally have a number of conversations on my way to my car at night when people trying to understand what was going on. So I appreciated them trying to understand. But that's an instance where a small part can make a huge difference in securing space and making sure you get the food, that you get to the places that you want, and that the weather predictions that you rely on are also of the highest integrity.
Well, thank you, Renee. The nation is definitely grateful that you had that job for our country during the period that you did, because you did a phenomenal job. So we appreciate you very much. So Mary, you are, people that don't know Mary, she's quite prolific, and she has this book actually behind me, The Cyber Effect, but she's also just wrote a recent article on reducing supply chain cyber risk. It begins with recognizing social engineering. So Mary talked a little bit about human factors. So I'm going to turn it over to her to talk about a little more about human factors in supply chain risk management. And I love, Renee, about you talking about humans trying to get in, humans trying to protect them, and then you have robots. And so this digital era is definitely creating new paradigms for everybody. So over to you, Mary.
Cheers, Diane. As they say in cyberspace, it's complicated. Two stats: we've seen a 78% increase in cybersecurity attacks, and we know that 9 out of 10 of these cyber attacks start with email phishing. So really, that points to the importance of human drivers as well as technical drivers of cybercrime. So I'm leading a pan-European project at the moment, which is investigating this balance between human and technical and the complexity of the environment that we're operating in. And I think it's really important that we conceptualize cyberspace as an environment. The US military joint protocols, breaks it into 3 layers in terms of cyberspace can be conceptualized as 3 different layers. You've got the physical network, physical infrastructure. You've got the logical network, that's the communications, and then you've got cyber persona. That's us, the humans. And when we look at the global supplier ecosystem, and we look at supply chain resilience, very often the focus is overly on the technical. In terms of, organizations want to know about, the cyber in terms of, say, screening vendors. A large organization will want to know about the vendors' security protocols, about their processes and procedures, about their firewall policies, about compliance certification. But they're not asking the vendor, what's their human cyber risk score? And I think this gets us into a fascinating area, an area that I'm working on at the moment, which is the area of online safety technologies. And what we've had is 20 or 30 years of cybersecurity. And no offense to anybody working in cybersecurity, but cybersecurity does not protect what it is to be human online. Cybersecurity is concerned with your data, your systems, and your networks. And yes, we want those to be robust, resilient, and secure. But we also want the humans who use and operate those systems to be psychologically robust, resilient, safe, and secure. And therein lies protection, whether it's an insider threat in terms of a malicious or an accidental insider threat that will actually compromises the supply chain. We have to focus on the importance of what it is to be human online.
Well, that was a lot to think about. Thank you, Mary. It ties in a little bit in terms of what we prepped with Cameron on, talking about, knowing all of your risks. So we appreciate the human aspect. Cameron, you were telling us about the work that you do with when we were preparing with banks and biotech and fintech and investors and energy and healthcare, and you said you're moving into life sciences. You've got like the full gamut, and you had talked about kind of how you step through your risk management program. And if you don't mind, I think that would be helpful for our listeners to kind of just hear how you actually go through it as part of your business model.
Yeah, so there's a number of different ways to go about it, depending upon the stakeholder sort of interested in understanding the problem, as well as how they're staffed. So a lot of organizations, especially on the PE and VC side, are very lean. They may only be a 20, 30 person firm, but they have portfolio companies that have rich data environments, especially when you consider, healthcare and life sciences. And so one way to do that I think is particularly scalable and valuable is to look at the threats and doing threat modeling. So you actually look at the variety of threats that may come across, and we've talked about some of those here. So some of them are environmental, they're personnel or persona based. They're physical. They're also, relative to a variety of technology. And so you look at this landscape of threats, and then you consider what scenarios a threat actor, and we think of them as personas as well. So there's a variety of sophistication, as well as the way these actors work together in different capacities, from, script kiddies all the way up to nation state actors. And they're going to operate in all various capacities. These people are friends, various actors from different parts of the world are really good at different aspects of the attack chain. And so they're going to work together to do that. And so what we need to be doing proactively is working with organizations nimbly to consider the various threats, as well as the landscape of opportunity to the attacker, and then use those threat models to think through what the risk management plan should be. So how are you simulating? We think of tabletops as the paper-based exercises, and then we think about the actual technical tests, from a pen test, which is typically more on the compliance side of things, all the way through a red team or an adversary emulation or adversary simulation. The idea here would be to risk manage relative to understanding what your threats to be, and then modeling those through both paper-based exercises and then scenario-based technical exercises to understand how to fail and fail quickly, knowing that we're all vulnerable. And I forget whose point it was, but I think of a picture of a chain-link fence, and there's a zip tie in the center, right? And so how hard would it be to break that one little zip tie? So understanding what your threats to be through modeling, and then scenario-based exercises, whether on paper and then technically, and then from there shoring up those gaps or deficits through things like policies, procedures, a variety of controls, whether technical and non-technical controls, and then federating those requirements out through your third-party risk management program and other avenues that you have, whether that's, there's a lot of great tools out there, but also just the ability for your team inside to be able to ingest all that information and then make proactive change internally.
Just a point, Diane, if I might.
Yeah, sure.
Cameron, talking about modeling, I think what's really important is to model and extrapolate the learnings of the pandemic, because that was a global health crisis. We have a saying in forensics: if you want to risk, you have to start at the apocalypse and work back. So, what we've been through with the pandemic, what it did was we saw an increase in anxiety in general population. We saw the infodemic. We saw the shift to the hybrid office. So look at the disruption that caused to protocols in terms of, protecting the integrity of the supply chain. And then what it did was it opened this incredible attack vector for cybercriminal and sophisticated threat actor population in terms of tapping into human psychological vulnerability during a crisis. And I think the one thing that we've learned from the pandemic is what's coming next. Because the next pandemic is likely to be an e-pandemic, whether it's ransomware or crime as a service or whatever's coming down the line. We saw yesterday in the Facebook outage, we got a glimpse yesterday of what an e-pandemic could look like. And I think modeling those threats and then thinking about, plan C, as I call it, plan cyber, alternative communication pathways, which arguably will be satellite based. So now we're back to space tech in terms of when the internet goes down, how does mass population communicate? Over to you, Renee.
Yeah, well, actually, thanks for the handoff, because I want to weave all both what Cameron said and you too, Mary. One is, right, so space internet scares me, and it also gives me great hope, because it could provide to it, but the threats in space are pretty significant. Just give you an example. So recently, the United States and Japan operated a satellite with a robot. That the robot came from the satellite, landed down on an asteroid. The asteroid was Bennu that the United States landed on, took a sample, had a little trouble closing the little door there with the sample on it, but we finally got that closed. The robot went back up to the satellite, and that sample is returning to the United States. So there's planetary protection issues, but let's focus on that capability. That capability was, I go find something in space, I send a robot to it, and I do something to the object I've just landed on. Put your James Bond hat on, and now tell me, what do you think about how safe it is in space and the threats that are very real in terms of weaponizing space debris, weaponizing a satellite, or just basically strolling right up to a satellite and doing something to it. So all that is real. It's possible. And so use your imagination to take it farther with that, so that you can say, from my perspective, again, I'm very hopeful about the internet in space, but also very, very concerned about it, and people taking the right precautions to ensure that it is safe to use, because we have humans up there. Right. And that's a nice, easy attack and to hold somebody ransom. So that is an option. And there's discussions now, too, to potentially name space as critical infrastructure for the United States, which would really kind of change the game and conversation. I think there's some real benefits to that. With everything, there's also a downside associated with it. So let the conversations begin, and the right folks with the right academic backgrounds and the practical application backgrounds participate. The other thing I want to say is building as, what does all this mean for a business or for a federal agency? It means that your enterprise risk model must have IT and cybersecurity as part of it. They are not their own swim lane. It is a strategic risk. It is a financial risk. It is a reputational risk. It's an operational risk. And if you put it in your risk model, then you can start to plan for resiliency, being able to shift to remote, figuring out, can I trust the communication that I have? But if you don't put it at the top levels of your business, you're not going to have the right strategic conversations. And I just want to applaud, Christy's position at GDIT is at the highest level, not only to talk about what GDIT can do and does for the United States federal government, states, tribes, and local governments as well, but also talks about how GDIT cannot be a hearing for a CIO, which is always my thing, is don't become my hearing, be my partner, and let's collaborate so we can protect together.
Over to you, Christy.
Yeah, I think that's right. I was just going to say, I think there's two things. One there, the first thing Renee said that really strikes me is that partnership, right? Because we all have to partner across the supply chain in order to close those seams, so that we are all working together against that same mission, regardless of which mission it is. That we have to close those seams together, and partnership is the only thing that's going to do that. And we see that through, CISA is trying to bring all of us in to have these conversations about how you report an incident, so that we can see, is this focused here or is it focused here? And we have a larger problem than we thought we did. And we need to look that down through the supply chain. I think the other key piece of this is that what we're all saying is that this is about managing risk, right? We're never going to eliminate it to zero, but if we have those critical thinkers who are putting their James Bond hats on, like Renee said, and managing it across that risk framework that Cameron was talking about, we have one too, right? You don't do anything in IT in our organization without going through a risk framework first to make sure that we are thinking about those nefarious things that might happen and how we might manage those risks, mitigate them where we can, knowing that we won't eliminate everything, but doing the best we can, putting that James Bond hat on to manage it as best we can. But again, in that partnership, because we can't do it alone. So it takes all of us, and being in the government space, it's working with our customers and working with the agencies who are creating standards as well, like NIST, working with our commercial vendors who have to recognize what this means in terms of national security and safety, and working with those who actually work in the government space who might have their eyes open a little bit more. So it's taking all of us to do this, and the conversation is finally in that right direction of we're all in it together, rather than pointing fingers and saying, no, it's you, no, it's you, no, it's you. Like, no, it's all of us. We all have to do this together.
Well, thank you, Christy. I think that's what I just love about Uniting Women in Cyber. It highlights the things that make us strong as women are also things that make us good in cybersecurity. We heard about Christy talking about partnering. We also heard Cameron talking about the landscape of opportunity. Women are always see something. Oh, that can be this. So that landscape of opportunity, it's that envisioning thing that you have that unique skill to do. We heard from Mary about using your imagination and where things are going to go. And those are traits that women have naturally. And then coming together, sharing risks, that's just who we are. And so I think that's what makes this field so incredibly powerful. I just love being in this field. And I just really, after getting to talk with Cameron and hearing what she does, she really is doing a lot of amazing work in keeping this country secure. Christy, thank you for what you do with GDIT. Thank you, Renee, for your service to our country and now with your consulting company. And thank you, Mary, for what you're doing in the human factors world, because there are so many aspects to cyber. And here you are, these four women are just amazing. So, and they're all working in slightly different facets. So I just wanted to thank Mary Beth and Elizabeth for founding the Cyber Guild, sponsoring the United Women in Cyber Conference. And I just want to really say thank you to my colleagues and the partners for all the work that they did. So I just want to say thanks to Mary Beth and Elizabeth, and I'm going to turn it back to Elizabeth and just thank you, everybody. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you, Diane. Nice job.
Thank you.
Yay.